In the Scottish case of Burnett and International Insurance Company of Hanover of 2021, the Supreme Court considered the scope of an exclusion of liability arising out of deliberate acts of an employee in a public liability insurance policy. The insurer appealed the decision of the lower court, which dismissed the application of the exclusion. The relevance of this case is that it emphasizes the approach taken by the Supreme Court, where the commercial context of the policy is given its full weight in the interpretation of the policy terms. In summary, the facts of this case are as follows. In 2013, the victim, who was a customer at a bar, was killed by a door steward after being placed in a neck hold, causing mechanical asphyxiation and death. As a qualifying relative under the Damages Scotland Act 2011, the victim's widow sued, number one, the door steward's employees, who were a security company, and number two, under the Third Party Rights Against Insurers Act 2010, the security company's insurer of a policy covering public liability. The widow sued the insurer in relation to the security company's vicarious liability for the wrongful acts of its employee. At the door steward's criminal trial, however, the jury did not accept that the door steward caused the victim's death, and as a result, only convicted him of assault. The trial judge found that the employee's actions were badly executed, but not badly motivated. The lower court decided against the insurer, holding that since the injury was not intentional, the exclusion did not apply, as it applied only when the outcome giving rise to the liability, namely death, was the intended objective. As a result, two issues on the appeal to the Supreme Court were identified. First, was the death of the victim brought about by a deliberate act of the door steward with the effect that the insurer's liability to indemnify the victim's widow was excluded? Second, was the death of the victim brought about by the door steward's wrongful arrest of the victim with the effect that the insurer's liability to indemnify the victim's widow was limited to £100,000? The second question was because the insurer also argued in the alternative that the lower indemnity sublimit of £100,000 under an extension of coverage for wrongful arrest applied to the claim. In brief, the Supreme Court highlighted that the critical issue was what was meant by deliberate acts. The insurer argued that deliberate acts means acts which are intended to cause injury, or acts which are carried out recklessly as to whether they will cause injury. In addition, the insurer also argued that the deliberate acts exclusion separated deliberate acts from willful default or neglect. But the intention was that both acts and default or neglect, that means omissions, should be interpreted similarly as only requiring recklessness. In response, the victim's widow argued that deliberate acts means acts which are intended to cause the specific injury which results, in this case, death, or at least serious injury, but that on any view, it does not include reckless acts. The Supreme Court unanimously dismissed the appeal. rejecting the insurer's case on the following 6 grounds. First, the natural meaning of deliberate acts connotes a different state of mind to recklessness. It involves consciously performing an act, intending its consequences. In the present context, this means carrying out an act intending to cause injury. Second, the natural meaning of willful in willful default in the exclusion includes deliberate, but willful may have a wider meaning. Thirdly, willful may have a wider meaning where it relates to a breach of duty. Default or neglect in the exclusion is apt to refer to a breach of duty rather than merely to omissions. Fourthly, the insurer was unable to refer to any case in which deliberate has been held to include recklessness. Fifthly, if exceptionally deliberate was intended to include recklessness, the policy should have made clear what that means. Sixthly, if the exclusion was meant to apply to reckless acts causing injury, as the insurer argued, this interpretation would lead to a very wide and commercially unlikely exclusion in view of the nature of the insured's door supervising business. In conclusion, the Supreme Court held that the insurer failed in its main argument that because willful could include recklessness, deliberate acts should also be interpreted as including recklessness. In relation to issue 2, the Supreme Court followed the decision of the lower court, concluding that the sublimit for wrongful arrest did not apply where there was no factual basis for such a claim. The relevance of this case is in the Supreme Court's approach to interpretation of the exclusion according to the commercial context of the insurance policy. If merely reckless acts could suffice for the deliberate acts exclusion to apply, it would be a commercially unlikely exclusion in view of the nature of the insured's business, which was described in the policy as manned, guarding, and door security contractors. The second point of note is that the Supreme Court interpreted the deliberate acts exclusion against the insurer, but it did not do so on the basis of the contra proferentum doctrine of interpretation. Instead, the Supreme Court reiterated its previous decision that the doctrine of interpretation contra proferentum was only relevant in a case of genuine ambiguity or real doubt as to the meaning of the words used.